Okay, welcome back again to Sravasti Abbey. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to do this BBC on Mother's Day. Let's see, where do I want to start? I better look at my notes. First of all, everyone has a mother. Every single being has a mother, at least of the ones that we can see and interact with, humans and animals. And the proof of that is that we're alive. So the very first thing that we can thank our mothers for is our very life. This is not a small thing. When you think about it as a kind of dependent arising, all of the dharma you do, all the good you've done, every experience you have had in this life, you can trace back to that as one of the causes, because if you weren't here and alive, you wouldn't have had any of those. So we begin by thanking our mothers for our lives. From a Mahayana point of view, everyone's been our mothers many, many times, because from that point of view, there's no logic to what would have been the beginning moment, the first cause, and what would be the final cause and the final moment. What would that be made up of? So from that point of view, we've been, our consciousness has been around since beginningless time. And every single person that you look at, it's a very strange thing to think about sometimes. Even I'm looking here at the community and thinking every single one of these people has been my mother, and I've been their mother. And in that lifetime, whatever it was, and in whatever form we had, we did our best. And so thank you, mothers out there and mothers here, and happy Mother's Day. I want to talk a minute about my mother, not because she's more special than any other mother. At moments to me she seemed that way, and other moments special in a different way. But because she's an example of what all mothers are like and what they go through. So my mother died for almost 5 years ago and was almost 102. She was born in 1906 in north central Montana, and she was a farm girl. And you know how you get those certain lines in your family that you hear just a little teeny bit of history, but it's kind of repeated. We had dirt floors. I can hear her. We had dirt floors. And I think coming out of, and I saw where they lived. It wasn't the farm we lived on. We lived on one about 10 miles away from that. But later in life, she showed us what that farm was, and it was quite rugged and poor. Her mother was an immigrant from Poland and only went through the 3rd grade. My mother went through high school, which was a huge achievement in that family. It was like a very big deal. And I don't think all of her she was the oldest, I don't think all of her siblings had that opportunity. She met my father in high school, and they got married, and shortly after high school, and my mother had 9 pregnancies. She came from a Catholic family, as did my dad. Birth control didn't much exist, but if it did, it was frowned on as interfering with what God is bringing. So she had 9 pregnancies, but only 4 of us lived to our adult lives. My mother had what were called at the time nervous breakdowns. And this was a common phrase in the 40s and 50s for women in the US. They had nervous breakdowns. There was no particular diagnosis, at least in the working class culture, for manic depressive or this or that, or anxiety disorder. It was all nervous breakdowns. And when you finally couldn't sustain yourself anymore, just being regular, difficult, and you actually kind of cracked, then you had a nervous breakdown, and they usually sent you somewhere, often to a hospital. My mother went to Catholic convents a couple times. And this meant that as children, the three of us were put with various sundry characters who did their best. But it was a little too exciting. Also, my father was addicted to alcohol, and that was a constant thing. But he was also a very good hard worker. So he almost never missed work. It was a very kind of odd thing. So I tell you these things because it's kind of like, as I was thinking about mothers, about getting what the Dharma has done is help me get a balanced picture. So the side I just told you is one side of the story. At the same time, my mother and father were both very kind, in particular, very generous. And we often had people living with us who were not our immediate family, someone who needed a place to stay. So we had all kinds of people living with us and took care of a lot of other people's children. And they did this very happily and very generously, and also had their parents living with us at different times. And that was expected of how you were with your family, but they were also this way with strangers. They were both very creative and resourceful and lively and very, very funny. My parents were really funny, which was very helpful in difficult times. So I want to tell one story about my mother's generosity and then kind of wrap this more around the Dharma. But when my mother was about 101 and still living in her own home with her little yard, she figured she couldn't really get up and down anymore to do her vegetable garden and her flowers. She said she could get down once a day and up once a day. So she would roll from place to place. She would get down once and roll around the garden. And she would tell the neighbors, if you see me rolling, don't worry, but if I stop rolling, then, then come and help. So, and she'd really do this. So finally she got where she couldn't get up and down anymore. So there was a man across the street from her. And my mother always made friends with everyone. Everyone, I'm telling you, it was just uncanny. And this man across the street had some kind of disability. It was hard to tell what, but if you talked with him very long, you could kind of tell something didn't always connect up for him. And she made good friends with him, and then wanted him to help with her yard, and she wanted to pay him $20 a week to do this. And he said, oh, I can't do that because I'll have to report it to my disability, and then they'll just take $80 off my check, so I won't take money from you, was what he said. I'll come help, but I won't take money. So my mother thought about it for a day, and she called him up and she said, when's your birthday? And so he told her, and she said, and when's your wife's birthday? And he told her, and she said, and then there's Valentine's Day and Easter and Christmas. And so I'll be having to give you a gift each of these holidays. So she went through her calendar, and every week she found a holiday, a birthday, a something, where she had to give him this $20 gift. And then he didn't have to report it, because he didn't have to report gifts, just if he was earning wages. So this was her clever, funny, and very generous kind of heart that she had. And I saw this many times. So it was a wonderful model for me. I knew I wouldn't make it through this without crying, but I got pretty far. So why I'm telling this is one thing I've learned from the Dharma is to really hold this whole picture of ourselves and hold a whole picture of our parents. Yes, they did whatever difficult and sometimes crazy, damaging, abusive, you can label it however you want. And they also did these absolutely amazing things. And I'm sure this is true of your parents or the people who raised you too. I read a statistic once that has stuck in my mind, and I often think of it as a parent and as a person who had parents, that The average parent in the US has to earn $100,000 extra to raise their child from age birth to 18, 21. So even as a non-parent, you can think about that and think all the work you did, and a parent has to do more because they've had to feed, clothe, shelter, educate, transport, medicine for another person. So this is the kind of things our parents did. In thinking about this, I thought about Venerable Tenzin Kacho, who's coming soon to the Abbey in a couple of weeks, but also was here around this time last year and did a retreat on when we're dying, things, you know, that would be useful. And she said several things that I think are so important that we say today to our parents. And I was able to say that to my mother before she died, having the wonderful opportunity to be with her as she died. And Tenzin Kacho says people want to hear three things and say three things. Please forgive me. I forgive you. And I love you. So say that today to your mother. And whether she's alive or dead, say it to your mother. And today, as you gather merit with whatever positive things you do, then dedicate it for her to set a good situation around her from here on out, and wish for her to have all the conditions to have a wonderful spiritual path and to continue to grow in these qualities like generosity, kindness, and patience. So I want to end with this one verse from Togme Sampo out of the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva, verse 10. I'm thinking of this, of course, he wrote this from the Mahayana perspective of every single person having been your mother. When your mothers who've loved you since time without beginning are suffering, what use is your own happiness? Therefore, to free limitless living beings, develop the altruistic intention. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So happy Mother's Day.